Tonight I will be reading a collection of heartwarming holiday tales to help you drift into a peaceful slumber. So get under those cozy blankets, settle into your favorite spot, and let's embark on a soothing journey through the magical realm of Christmas storytelling. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and slowly start to focus on your breath. Feel the cool air entering your nose and the warm air exiting. Breathe in and breathe out, allowing yourself to let go of any tension. Imagine with each breath, you're enveloped in the serene atmosphere of a rustic cabin, nestled by a crackling fire. The gentle glow warming your face. Embrace the soft, crackling sounds and the comforting smell of wood burning in the air. Now visualize stepping outside the cabin and finding yourself in a peaceful, snowy forest. The ground is covered in a soft blanket of snow, and delicate snowflakes are gently falling from the sky. Feel the coolness of the air on the tip of your nose and the gentle whisper of a breeze on your cheeks. As you walk through the forest, notice the snow crunching beneath your feet. Each step brings a deeper sense of tranquility, as if the stress of the day is melting away with every footprint you leave behind. Look up at the sky. The stars are twinkling like 1,000 tiny fairy lights. Allow their glow to fill you with a sense of calm and wonder. And now once again, see yourself back in your cozy bedroom, nestled under your warm, comfy blankets and pillows. And let the weight of the day just melt down into your bed. And as you sink into this feeling of relaxation and tranquility, it becomes easier to allow your imagination to take you on a magical journey of storytelling, knowing that you are safe, warm, and at peace. And so, as always, my friend, take a full, comfortable breath. Lay back, relax, and enjoy the story. One day in Russia, there was a heavy snowstorm. The snow was deep on the ground, and in the forest, the branches of the trees bent under its weight. In this forest, a little girl was struggling along. There was no path for her to follow, for the snow covered all the paths. The little girl's name was Paulina. She was dressed in a long fur coat, and she wore a cap and mittens and gaiters of fur, so that she looked more like a little furry animal than a little girl. She kept tramping along, not a bit afraid, when suddenly she heard a call for help. "Help! Help!" the call came. "Coming! Coming!" she called back. She went in the direction of the voice, and soon she saw a man making his way toward her. His dress was that of a peasant. "Will you please direct me out of this forest, little one?" he asked. "You probably know the paths about." "No, I am a stranger here," Paulina answered. "I live in Kiev, that is. I did live there, but I'm on my way to my father." "Where is your father?" asked the man. "He's in Siberia. They banished him." "But, little one," said the stranger, "that is a terrible place for a child to go to. That frozen country where wicked people are sent." "Oh, yes, but my father is there, you know," said Paulina. "Who is your father?" the man asked. The little girl was about to tell him, when she noticed a look of interest on the stranger's face, so she said, "Did you say that you had lost your way in the forest? Do you live far from here?" "Yes, very far. I am lost, and am nearly perishing from hunger and cold. How far is it to the next village?" "They told me it was some miles on," said the child, "but I will take you back to the woodman's cottage where I spent the night. The woman is a kind-hearted person, and I'm sure she will give you shelter." "That is kind of you, little one," said the stranger, "but you will be hindering your own journey if you do that." "I know that my father would want me to show kindness, even though it did put me back some," Paulina said. "You must have a good father to give you such training. Why did the emperor send him into exile?" the stranger asked her. "Oh, my father had enemies who lied to the emperor, and there was no chance given to my father to explain. So the emperor sent him away to Siberia, and I am trying to find my way there to him." While they walked through the forest, the stranger told Paulina about his own little daughter who was expecting him to spend Christmas with her. At last they reached the woodman's hut. The woman greeted them kindly, and while Paulina went into another room to help her prepare the evening meal, the stranger was left warming himself by the fire and rocking the cradle. Once, Paulina thought she heard voices, as if the stranger were talking to someone, but when she went back, she found him alone, still warming his hands and rocking the cradle with his foot. That night, the stranger slept on the floor in front of the fire. There was no other place for him, but he was glad to be safe from the storm outside. Early in the morning, the two started out through the forest again. They must hurry if they were to reach the next village before darkness fell. The storm had passed over, and the day was cold and clear, a beautiful winter's day. The little girl and the stranger reached the village on the other side of the forest early in the afternoon, and there before them they saw a beautiful sleigh drawn by 4 horses. There were 4 servants standing near, "What a lovely sleigh," exclaimed Paulina. "Yes, I wonder where they're going. I will ask them," the stranger said. He went nearer the men and spoke to them. "We are driving for our master to Igorov," they said. "Why, that is where my daughter is. If I might only ride with you, I could spend Christmas with her. Tomorrow is Christmas Day, you know. And, little one, you could spend Christmas with us too." "Oh, no," said Paulina. "I could not take the time. I must hurry on to my father. But it would be lovely if we could only ride in this beautiful sleigh. You could spend the night with us, and then we could set you on your way because you've been so kind to me," the man told her. The servants were willing to let them ride in the beautiful sleigh, and soon they were speeding over the snow toward the great city. Once, the stranger took a scarf from a pocket on the side of the sleigh and threw it about his neck. Paulina frowned and promptly placed it back in the pocket. "It isn't right for you to touch anything in the sleigh. It belongs to someone else, and I'm beginning to fear that you may not be an honest man," she said gravely. The stranger laughed at her, but he did not take the scarf again. They sped on over the snow until, as darkness fell, they reached the city. Soon they entered a large courtyard, and the stranger took Paulina's hand and led her into a narrow passageway and up a small winding stairway. "Where are you taking me?" asked Paulina. "I feel almost sure now that you are not an honest man. I think that you may even be a thief." The man laughed again. "No, I am an honest man. You will believe me when you see my little daughter. I trusted you in the forest. Now you trust me." He led her into a large room, and they sat down upon a sofa. "We will wait here until my daughter comes," he said. Soon the door opened, and a beautiful little girl, about as large as Paulina, came toward them. She looked puzzled when she saw the rough-looking man with the little girl. She went close to the stranger and looked into his face. "It is my father," she cried, and threw her arms around his neck. "But why are you dressed like a peasant? Has there been an accident? And who is this little stranger?" The man took her on his lap and told her how his sleigh had been overturned in the snowstorm, and how he had found his way to a peasant's hut where they had given him dry clothes to put on, and how he had started out alone to find his way through the forest, and how he was nearly perishing with cold and hunger when this little girl had rescued him, and how, if it had not been for her, he would have died in the snow in the forest. He told her how little Paulina was on her way to Siberia to find her father, and how they went to the woodman's hut where a servant had found him, and how he had planned for the sleigh to meet them on the other side of the forest. "Oh," Paulina interrupted him, "then there was somebody talking with you when we were preparing the evening meal?" "Yes, and everything came out just as I had planned. And do you know, little daughter, this Paulina would not let me put on my own scarf around my neck. She thought I was a thief. She is an honest little girl, but she will not tell me her name. She does not trust me." "But why should I trust you, when you will not tell me who you are or anything about yourself?" Paulina asked. "Do trust my father, Paulina. I'm sure he can help you." "He will tell you who he is soon, I know," the beautiful little girl said. "Yes, little one," the stranger said. "I know someone who could speak to the emperor about your father, and perhaps he could be pardoned. Please tell me your name, and then before you go away, I will answer any questions about myself you may ask me." "Do tell my father, Paulina," the little girl urged. Paulina threw her arms about the stranger's knees. "Oh, if you could only get the emperor to pardon him. But I do not ask for a pardon. He has done nothing to be pardoned for. All that I ask is that he may have justice done him. My father is Vladimir Betskoy." The stranger frowned, and then he whispered, "There must be some mistake. He must be a good man to have such an honest little daughter." Then he said to Paulina, "Do you believe now that I am an honest man, since you have seen my daughter?" "Oh, yes, indeed, I do. You couldn't help being good and honest. She's so beautiful. I think her face is like what a queen's should be," Paulina answered eagerly. The stranger and his little daughter smiled, and the man said, "Well, I believe that your father is an honest man since I have seen you, and I can tell you now, I know he will be pardoned." "Tell her, father, tell the little Paulina who you are," his daughter whispered. "Until your father returns to you, little one, you must stay here, and I will be a father to you, as I am father to all the people of Russia, for I am the emperor." Just then, the bells began ringing, and voices outside began singing, for it was the beginning of Christmas morning, and Paulina said, "This is the happiest Christmas morning I have ever known." Once upon a time in a country far away from here, there lived a little girl named Ruth. Ruth's home was not at all like our houses, for she lived in a little tower on top of the great stone wall that surrounded the town of Bethlehem. Ruth's father was the hotel keeper. The Bible says the innkeeper. This inn was not at all like other hotels either. There was a great open yard, which was called the courtyard. All about this yard were little rooms, and each traveler who came to the hotel rented one. The inn stood near the great stone wall of the city, so that as Ruth stood one night looking out of the tower window, she looked directly into the courtyard. It was truly a strange sight that met her eyes. So many people were coming to the inn, for the king had made a law that every man should come back to the city where his father used to live to be counted and to pay his taxes. Some of the people came on the backs of camels with great rolls of bedding and their dishes for cooking upon the back of the beast. Some of them came on little donkeys, and on their backs too were the bedding and the dishes. Some of the people came walking slowly, they were so tired. Many miles some of them had come. As Ruth looked down into the courtyard, she saw the camels being led to their places by their masters. She heard the snap of the whips. She saw the sparks shoot up from the fires that were kindled in the courtyard, where each person was preparing his own supper. She heard the cries of tired, hungry little children. Presently, her mother, who was cooking supper, came over to the window and said, "Ruthie, thou shalt hide in the house until all those people are gone. Dost thou understand?" "Yes, my mother," said the child, and she left the window to follow her mother back to the stove, limping painfully, for little Ruth was a cripple. Her mother stooped suddenly and caught the child in her arms. "My poor little lamb, it was a mule's kick just 6 years ago that hurt your poor back and made you lame. "Never mind, my mother. My back does not ache today, and lately, when the light of the strange new star has shone down upon my bed, my back has felt so much stronger, and I have felt so happy, as though I could climb upon the rays of the star and up into the sky and above the stars." Her mother shook her head sadly. "Thou art not likely to climb much, now or ever. But come, the supper is ready. Let us go find your father. I wonder what keeps him." They found the father standing at the gate of the courtyard, talking to a man and woman who had just arrived. The man was tall, with a long beard, and he led by a rope a snow-white mule, on which sat the drooping figure of the woman. As Ruth and her mother came near, they heard the father say, "But I tell thee that there is no more room in the inn. Hast thou no friends where thou canst go spend the night?" The man shook his head. "No, none," he answered. "I care not for myself, but my poor wife." Little Ruth pulled at her mother's dress. "Mother, the oxen sleep out under the stars these warm nights, and the straw in the caves is clean and warm. I have made a bed there for my little lamb." Ruth's mother bowed before the tall man. "Thou didst hear the child. It is as she says. The straw is clean and warm." The tall man bowed his head. "We shall be very glad to stay." And he helped the sweet-faced woman down from the donkey's back and led her away to the cave stable, while the little Ruth and her mother hurried up the stairs that they might send a bowl of porridge to the sweet-faced woman and a sup of new milk as well. That night, when little Ruth lay down in her bed, the rays of the beautiful new star shone through the window more brightly than before. They seemed to soothe the tired, aching shoulders. She fell asleep and dreamed that the beautiful bright star burst, and out of it came countless angels who sang in the night, "Glory to God in the highest, peace on earth, goodwill to men." And then it was morning, and her mother was bending over her and saying, "Awake, awake, little Ruth. Mother has something to tell thee." Then as the eyes opened slowly, the angels came in the night, little one, and left a baby to lay beside your little white lamb in the manger. That afternoon, Ruth went with her mother to the fountain. The mother turned aside to talk to the other women of the town about the strange things heard and seen the night before. But Ruth went on and sat down by the edge of the fountain. The child was not frightened, for strangers came often to the well, but never had she seen men who looked like the three who now came towards her. The first one, a tall man with a long white beard, came close to Ruth and said, "Canst tell us, child, where is born he that is called the King of the Jews?" "I know of no king," she answered. "But last night, while the star was shining, the angels brought a baby to lie beside my white lamb in the manger." The stranger bowed his head. "That must be he. Wilt thou show us the way to him, my child?" So Ruth ran, and her mother led the three men to the cave, and when they saw the child, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy, and opening their gifts, they presented unto him gold and frankincense and myrrh, with wonderful jewels, so that Ruth's mother's eyes shone with wonder. But little Ruth saw only the baby, which lay asleep on its mother's breast. "If only I might hold him in my arms," she thought, but was afraid to ask. After a few days, the strangers left Bethlehem, all but the three, the man whose name was Joseph, and Mary his wife, and the baby. Then, as of old, little Ruth played about the courtyard, and the white lamb frolicked at her side. Often she dropped to her knees to press the little woolly white head against her breast while she murmured, "My little lamb, my very, very own, I love you, Lammy." And then together they would steal over to the entrance of the cave to peep in at the baby, and always she thought, if I only might touch his hand, but was afraid to ask. One night, as she lay in her bed, she thought to herself, "Oh, I wish I had a beautiful gift for him, such as the wise men brought, but I have nothing at all to offer, and I love him so much." Just then, the light of the star, which was nightly fading, fell across the foot of the bed and shone full upon the white lamb which lay asleep at her feet. And then she thought of something. The next morning, she arose with her face shining with joy. She dressed carefully, and with the white lamb held close to her breast, went slowly and painfully down the stairway and over to the door of the cave. "I have come," she said, "to worship him, and I have brought him my white lamb." The mother smiled at the lame child. Then she lifted the baby from her breast and placed him in the arms of the little maid who knelt at her feet. A few days after, an angel came to the father, Joseph, and told him to take the baby and hurry to the land of Egypt, for the wicked king wanted to do it harm. And so these three, the father, mother, and baby, went by night to the far country of Egypt. And the star grew dimmer and dimmer, and passed away forever from the skies over Bethlehem. But little Ruth grew straight and strong and beautiful as the almond trees in the orchard, and all the people who saw her were amazed, for Ruth was once a cripple. It was the light of the strange star, her mother said. But little Ruth knew it was the touch of the blessed Christ child who was once folded against her heart. The Little Match Girl. It was dreadfully cold. It was snowing fast and was almost dark as evening came on, the last evening of the year. In the cold and the darkness, there went along the street a poor little girl, bareheaded and with naked feet. When she left home, she had slippers on, it is true, but they were much too large for her feet, slippers that her mother had used till then, and the poor little girl lost them in running across the street when two carriages were passing terribly fast. When she looked for them, one was not to be found, and a boy seized the other and ran away with it, saying he would use it for a cradle someday when he had children of his own. So on the little girl went with her bare feet that were red and blue with cold. In an old apron that she wore were bundles of matches, and she carried a bundle also in her hand. No one had bought so much as a bunch all day long, and no one had given her even a penny. Poor little girl, shivering with cold and hunger, she crept along, a perfect picture of misery. The snowflakes fell on her long flaxen hair, which hung in pretty curls about her throat, but she thought not of her beauty nor of the cold. Lights gleamed in every window, and there came to her the savory smell of roast goose for it was New Year's Eve, and it was this of which she thought. In a corner formed by two houses, one of which projected beyond the other, she sat cowering down. She had drawn under her little feet, but she still grew colder and colder. Yet she dared not go home, for she had sold no matches and could not bring a penny of money. Her father would be very angry, and besides, it was cold enough at home, for they had only the house roof above them, and though the largest holes had been stopped with straw and rags, there were left many through which the cold wind could whistle. And now her little hands were nearly frozen with cold. Alas, a single match might do her good if she might only draw it from the bundle, rub it against the wall, and warm her fingers by it. So at last she drew one out. Whist! How it blazed and burned! It gave out a warm, bright flame like a little candle as she held her hands over it. A wonderful little light it was. It really seemed to the little girl as if she sat before a great iron stove with polished brass feet and brass shovel and tongs. So blessedly it burned that the little maiden stretched out her feet to warm them also. How comfortable she was! But lo, the flame went out, the stove vanished, and nothing remained but the little burned match in her hand. She rubbed another match against the wall. It burned brightly, and where the light fell upon the wall, it became transparent like a veil, so that she could see through it into the room. A snow-white cloth was spread upon the table, on which was a beautiful china dinner service, while a roast goose, stuffed with apples and prunes, steamed famously and sent forth a most savory smell. And what was more delightful still, and wonderful, the goose jumped from the dish, with knife and fork still in its breast, and waddled along the floor straight to the little girl. But then the match went out, and nothing was left to her but the thick, damp wall. She lighted another match, and now she was under a most beautiful Christmas tree, larger and far more prettily trimmed than the one she had seen through the glass doors at the rich merchants'. Hundreds of wax tapers were burning on the green branches, and happy little figures, such as she had seen in shop windows, looked down upon her. The child stretched out her hands to them. Then the match went out. Still, the lights of the Christmas tree rose higher and higher. She saw them now as stars in heaven, and one of them fell, forming a long trail of fire. "Now someone is dying," murmured the child softly, for her grandmother, the only person who had loved her and who was now dead, had told her that whenever a star falls, a soul mounts up to God. She struck yet another match against the wall, and again it was light, and in the brightness there appeared before her the dear old grandmother, bright and radiant, yet sweet and mild and happy as she had never looked on earth. "Oh, grandmother," cried the child, "take me with you. I know you will go away when the match burns out. You too will vanish, like the warm stove, the splendid New Year's feast, the beautiful Christmas tree." And lest her grandmother should disappear, she rubbed the whole bundle of matches against the wall, and the matches burned with such a brilliant light that it became brighter than noonday. Her grandmother had never looked so grand and beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and both flew together, joyously and gloriously, mounting higher and higher, far above the earth, and for them There was neither hunger, nor cold, nor care. They were with God. But in the corner, at dawn of day, sat the poor girl, leaning against the wall, with red cheeks and smiling mouth, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. Stiff and cold she sat, with the matches, one bundle of which was burned. She wanted to warm herself, poor little thing, people said. No one imagined what sweet visions she had had, or how gloriously she had gone with her grandmother to enter upon the joys of a new year. Piccola lived in Italy, where the oranges grow and where all the year the sun shines warm and bright. I suppose you think Piccola was a very strange name for a little girl, but in her country it was not strange at all, and her mother thought it the sweetest name a little girl ever had. Piccola had no kind father, no big brother or sister, and no sweet baby to play with and love. She and her mother lived all alone in an old stone house that looked on a dark, narrow street. They were very poor, and the mother was away from home almost every day, washing clothes and scrubbing floors, and working hard to earn money for her little girl and herself. So you see, Piccola was alone a great deal of the time, and if she had not been a very happy, contented little child, I hardly know what she would have done. She had no playthings, except a heap of stones in the backyard that she used for building houses, and a very old, very ragged doll that her mother had found in the street one day. But there was a small round hole in the stone wall at the back of her yard, and her greatest pleasure was to look through that into her neighbor's garden. When she stood on a stone and put her eyes close to the hole, she could see the green grass in the garden, and smell the sweet flowers, and even hear the water splashing into the fountain. She had never seen anyone walking in the garden, for it belonged to an old gentleman who did not care about grass and flowers. One day in the autumn, her mother told her that the old gentleman had gone away and had rented his house to a family of little American children who had come with their sick mother to spend the winter in Italy. After this, Piccola was never lonely, for all day long the children ran and played and danced and sang in the garden. It was several weeks before they saw her at all, and I'm not sure they ever would have done so, but one day the kitten ran away, and in chasing her, they came close to the wall and saw Piccola's black eyes through the hole in the stones. They were a little frightened at first and did not speak to her, but the next day she was there again, and Rose, the oldest girl, went up to the wall and talked to her a little while. When the children found that she had no one to play with and was very lonely, they talked to her every day and often brought her fruits and candies and passed them through the hole in the wall. One day they even pushed the kitten through, but the hole was hardly large enough for her, and she meowed and scratched and was very much frightened. After that, the little boy said he would ask his father if the hole might not be made larger, and then Piccola can come in and play with them. The father had found out that Piccola's mother was a good woman, and that the little girl herself was sweet and kind, so that he was very glad to have some of the stones broken away and an opening made for Piccola to come in. How excited she was, and how glad the children were when she first stepped into the garden. She wore her best dress, a long, bright-colored woolen skirt and a white waist. Round her neck was a string of beads, and on her feet were little wooden shoes. It would seem very strange to us, would it not, to wear wooden shoes? But Piccola and her mother had never worn anything else, and never had any money to buy stockings. Piccola almost always ran about barefooted, like the kittens and the chickens and the little ducks. What a good time they had had that day, and how glad Piccola's mother was that her little girl could have such a pleasant, safe place to play in while she was away at work. By and by, December came, and the little Americans began to talk about Christmas. One day, when Piccola's curly head and bright eyes came peeping through the hole in the wall, and they ran to her and helped her in, and as they did so, they all asked her at once what she thought she would have for a Christmas present. "A Christmas present," said Piccola. "Why, what is that?" All the children looked surprised at this, and Rose said rather gravely, "Dear Piccola, don't you know what Christmas is?" Oh, yes, Piccola knew it was the happy day when the baby Christ was born, and she had been to church on that day and heard the beautiful singing, and had seen the picture of the babe lying in the manger, with cattle and sheep sleeping round about. Oh, yes, she knew all that very well. But what was a Christmas present? Then the children began to laugh and to answer her all together. There was such a clatter of tongues that she could hear only a few of the words now and then, such as chimney, Santa Claus, stockings, reindeer, Christmas Eve, candies and toys. Piccola put her hands over her ears and said, "Oh, I can't understand one word. You tell me, Rose." Then Rose told her all about jolly Santa Claus, with his red cheeks and white beard and fur coat, and about his reindeer and sleigh full of toys. "Every Christmas Eve," said Rose, "he comes down the chimney and fills the stockings of all the good children. So, Piccola, you hang up your stocking, and who knows what a beautiful Christmas present you will find when morning comes." Of course, Piccola thought this was a delightful plan and was very pleased to hear about it. Then all the children told her of every Christmas Eve they could remember, and of the presents they had had, so that she went home thinking of nothing but dolls and hoops and balls and ribbons and marbles and wagons and kites. She told her mother about Santa Claus, and her mother seemed to think that perhaps he did not know there was any little girl in that house, and very likely he would not come at all. But Piccola felt very sure Santa Claus would remember her, for her little friends had promised to send a letter up the chimney to remind him. Christmas Eve came at last. Piccola's mother hurried home from her work. They had their little supper of soup and bread, and soon it was bedtime. Time to get ready for Santa Claus. But oh, Piccola remembered then for the first time that the children had told her she must hang up her stocking, and she hadn't any, and neither had her mother. How sad it was. Now Santa Claus would come and perhaps be angry because he couldn't find any place to put the present. The poor little girl stood by the fireplace, and the big tears began to run down her cheeks. And just then her mother called to her, "Hurry, Piccola, come to bed." What should she do? But she stopped crying and tried to think, and in a moment she remembered her wooden shoes and ran off to get one of them. She put it close to the chimney and said to herself, "Surely Santa Claus will know what it's there for. He will know I haven't any stockings, so I gave him the shoe instead." Then she went off happily to her bed and was asleep almost as soon as she had nestled close to her mother's side. The sun had only just begun to shine next morning, when Piccola awoke. With one jump, she was out on the floor and running toward the chimney. The wooden shoe was lying where she left it, but you can never guess what was in it. Piccola had not meant to wake her mother, but this surprise was more than any little girl could bear and yet be quiet. So she danced to the bed with the shoe in her hand, calling, "Mother, Mother, look, look, see the present Santa Claus brought me." Her mother raised her head and looked into the shoe. "Why, Piccola," she said, "a little chimney swallow nestling in your shoe. What a good Santa Claus to bring you a bird." "Good Santa Claus, dear Santa Claus," cried Piccola, and she kissed her mother and kissed the bird and kissed the shoe and even threw kisses up the chimney. She was so happy. When the birdling was taken out of the shoe, they found that he did not try to fly, only to hop about the room, and as they looked closer, they could see that one of his wings was hurt a little, but the mother bound it up carefully so that it did not seem to pain him, and he was so gentle that he took a drink of water from a cup and even ate crumbs and seeds out of Piccola's hands. She was a proud little girl when she took her Christmas present to show the children in the garden. They had had a great many gifts: dolls that could say Mama, bright picture books, trains of cars, toy pianos, but not one of their playthings was alive like Piccola's birdling. They were as pleased as she, and Rose hunted about the house until she found a large wicker cage that belonged to a black bird she once had. She gave the cage to Piccola, and the swallow seemed to make himself quite at home in it at once, and sat on the perch, winking his bright eyes at the children. Rose had saved a bag of candies for Piccola, and when she went home at last, with the cage and her dear swallow safely inside it, I'm sure there was not a happier little girl in the whole country of Italy. I'm so glad tomorrow is Christmas because I'm going to have lots of presents. So am I glad, though I don't expect any presents but a pair of mittens. And so am I, but I shan't have any presents at all. As the three little girls trudged home from school, they said these things, and as Tilley spoke, both the others looked at her with pity and some surprise, for she spoke cheerfully, and they wondered how she could be happy when she was so poor she could have no presents on Christmas. "Don't you wish you could find a purse full of money right here in the path?" said Kate, the child who was going to have lots of presents. "Oh, don't I, if I could keep it honestly," and Tilley's eyes shone at the very thought. "What would you buy?" asked Bessie, rubbing her cold hands and longing for her mittens. "I'd buy a pair of large, warm blankets, a load of wood, a shawl for my mother, and a pair of shoes for me. And if there was enough left, I'd give Bessie a new hat, and then she needn't wear Ben's old felt one," answered Tilley. The girls laughed at that, but Bessie pulled the funny hat over her ears and said she was much obliged, but she'd rather have candy. "Let's look, and maybe we can find a purse. People are always going about with money at Christmas time, and someone may lose it here," said Kate. So, as they walked along the snowy road, they looked about them, half in earnest, half in fun. Suddenly, Tilley sprang forward, exclaiming, "I see it! I found it!" The others followed, but all stopped disappointed, for it wasn't a purse. It was only a little bird. It lay upon the snow with its wings spread and feebly fluttering, as if too weak to fly. Its little feet were benumbed with cold, Its once bright eyes were dull with pain, and instead of a blithe song, it could only utter a faint chirp now and then, as if crying for help. "Nothing but a stupid old robin. How provoking," cried Kate, sitting down to rest. "I shan't touch it. I found one once and took care of it, and the ungrateful thing flew away the minute it was well," said Bessie, creeping under Kate's shawl and putting her hands under her chin to warm them. "Poor little birdie, how pitiful he looks, and how glad he must be to see someone coming to help him. I'll pick him up gently and carry him home to Mother. Don't be frightened, dear. I'm your friend." And Tilley knelt down in the snow, stretching her hand to the bird with the tenderest pity in her face. "Don't stop for that thing. It's getting late and cold. Let's go on and look for the purse," they said, moving away. "You wouldn't leave it to die," cried Tilley. "I'd rather have the bird than the money, so I shan't look any more. The purse wouldn't be mine, and I should only be tempted to keep it. But this poor thing will thank and love me, and I'm so glad I came in time." Gently lifting the bird, Tilley felt its tiny cold claws cling to her hand and saw its dim eyes brighten as it nestled down with a grateful chirp. "Now I've got a Christmas present after all," she said, smiling as they walked on. "I always wanted a bird, and this one will be such a pretty pet for me. He'll fly away the first chance he gets and die anyhow, so you'd better not waste your time over him," said Bessie. "He can't pay for you taking care of him, and my mother says it isn't worthwhile to help folks that can't help us," added Kate. "My mother says, do as you'd be done by, and I'm sure I'd like anyone to help me if I was dying of cold and hunger. Love your neighbor as yourself is another of her sayings. This bird is my little neighbor, and I'll love and care for him, as I often wish our rich neighbor would love and care for us," answered Tilley, breathing her warm breath over the benumbed bird, who looked up at her with confiding eyes, quick to feel and know a friend. "What a funny girl you are," said Kate, caring for that silly bird and talking about loving your neighbor in that sober way. "Mr. King don't care a bit for you and never will, though he knows how poor you are, so I don't think your plan amounts to much. I believe it, though, and shall do my part anyway. Good night. I hope you'll all have a Merry Christmas and lots of pretty things," answered Tilley as they parted. Her eyes were full, and she felt so poor as she went on alone toward the little old house where she lived. It would have been so pleasant to know that she was going to have some of the pretty things all children love to find in their full stockings on Christmas morning, and pleasanter still to have been able to give her mother something nice. So many comforts were needed, and there was no hope of getting them, for they could barely get food and fire. "Never mind, birdie. We'll make the best of what we have and be merry in spite of everything. You shall have a happy Christmas anyway, and I know God won't forget us if everyone else does." She stopped a minute to wipe her eyes and lean her cheek against the bird's soft breast, finding great comfort in the little creature, though it could only love her and nothing more. "See, Mother, what a nice present I found," she cried, going in with a cherry face that was like sunshine in the dark room. "I'm glad of that, dearie, for I haven't been able to get my little girl anything but a rosy apple. Poor bird, give it some of your warm bread and milk." "Why, Mother, what a big bowlful. I'm afraid you gave me all the milk," said Tilley, smiling over the nice steaming supper that stood ready for her. "I've had plenty, dear. Sit down and dry your wet feet and put the bird in my basket on this warm flannel." Tilley peeped into the closet and saw nothing there but dry bread. Mother's given me all the milk and is going without her tea because she knows I'm hungry. Now I'll surprise her and she'll have a good supper too. She's going to split wood and I'll fix it while she's gone." So Tilley put down the old teapot, carefully poured out part of the milk, and from her pocket produced a great plummy bun that one of the school children had given her and she had saved for her mother. A slice of the dry bread was nicely toasted and the bit of butter set by her put on it. When her mother came in, there was the table drawn up in a warm place, a hot cup of tea ready, and Tilley and Bertie waiting for her. Such a poor little supper, and yet such a happy one, for love, charity, and contentment were guests here, and that Christmas Eve was a simple one than that up at the great house, where lights shone, fires blazed, and a great tree glittered, and music sounded as the children danced and played. "We must go to bed early, for we've only wood enough to last over tomorrow. I shall be paid for my work the day after, and then we can get some," said Tilley's mother as they sat by the fire. "If my bird was only a fairy bird and would give us 3 wishes, how nice it would be. Poor dear, he can't give me anything. But it's no matter," answered Tilley, looking at the robin who lay in the basket with his head under his wing. "He can give you one thing, Tilley, the pleasure of doing good. That is one of the sweetest things in life, and the poor can enjoy it as well as the rich." As her mother spoke, with her tired hand softly stroking her daughter's hair, Tilley suddenly started and pointed to the window, saying in a frightened whisper, "I saw a face, a man's face looking in. It's gone now, but I truly saw it. Some traveler attracted by the lights, perhaps. I'll go and see." And Tilley's mother went to the door. No one was there. The wind blew cold, the stars shone, the snow lay white on field and wood, and the Christmas moon was glittering in the sky. "What sort of face was it?" asked Tilley's mother, coming back. "A pleasant sort of face, I think, but I was so startled I don't quite know what it was like. I wish we had a curtain there," said Tilley. "I like to have our light shine out in the evening, for the road is dark and lonely just here, and the twinkle of our lamp is pleasant to people's eyes as they go by. We can do so little for our neighbors. I am glad to cheer the way for them. Now put those poor old shoes to dry and go to bed, dearie. I'll come soon." Tilley went, taking her bird with her to sleep in his basket nearby, lest he should be lonely in the night. Soon the little house was dark and still, and no one saw the Christmas spirits at their work that night. When Tilley opened the door next morning, she gave a loud cry, clapped her hands, and then stood still, quite speechless with wonder and delight. There, before the door, lay a great pile of wood, all ready to burn, a big bundle and a basket, with a lovely bouquet of roses, holly, and evergreen tied to the handle. "Oh, Mother, did the fairies do it?" cried Tilley, pale with her happiness, as she seized the basket while her mother took in the bundle. "Yes, dear, the best and dearest fairy in the world, called Charity. She walks abroad at Christmas time, does beautiful deeds like this, and does not stay to be thanked," answered her mother with full eyes as she undid the parcel. There they were, the warm, thick blankets, the comfortable shawls, the new shoes, and best of all, a pretty winter hat for Bessie. The basket was full of good things to eat, and on the flowers lay a paper saying, "For the little girl who loves her neighbor as herself." "Mother, I really think my bird is a fairy bird. and all these splendid things come from him," said Tilley, laughing and crying with joy. It really did seem so, for as she spoke, the robin flew to the table, hopped to the bouquet, and perching among the roses, began to chirp with all his little might. The sun streamed in on flowers, bird, and happy child, and no one saw a shadow glide away from the window. No one ever knew that Mr. King had seen and heard the little girls the night before, or dreamed that the rich neighbor had learned a lesson from the poor neighbor. And Tilley's bird was a fairy bird, for by her love and tenderness to the helpless thing, she brought good gifts to herself, happiness to the unknown giver of them, and a faithful little friend who did not fly away, but stayed with her till the snow was gone, making summer for her in the wintertime. Out in the woods stood a nice little fir tree. The place he had was a very good one. The sun shone on him. As to fresh air, there was enough of that, and round him grew many large-sized comrades, pines as well as firs. But the little fir wanted so very much to be a grown-up tree. He did not think of the warm sun and of the fresh air. He did not care for the little cottage children that ran about and prattled when they were in the woods looking for wild strawberries. The children often came with a whole pitcher full of berries, or a long row of them threaded on a straw, and sat down near the young tree and said, "Oh, how pretty he is! What a nice little fir!" But this was what the tree could not bear to hear. At the end of a year, he had shot up a good deal, and after another year he was a bit taller, for with fir trees one can always tell by the shoots how many years old they are. "Oh, were I but such a high tree as the others are," sighed he. "Then I should be able to spread out my branches, and with the tops look into the wild world. Then the birds would build nests among my branches, and when there was a breeze, I could bend with as much stateliness as the others. Neither the sunbeams, nor the birds, nor the red clouds which morning and evening sailed above him gave the little tree any pleasure. In winter, when the snow lay glittering on the ground, a hare would often come leaping along and jump right over the little tree. Oh, that made him so angry. But 2 winters were past, and in the 3rd the tree was so large that the hare was obliged to go around it. To grow and grow, to get older and be tall, thought the tree. That, after all, is the most delightful thing in the world. In autumn, the woodcutters always came and felled some of the largest trees. This happened every year. The young fir tree, that had now grown to a larger size, trembled at the sight, for the magnificent great trees fell to the earth with noise and cracking. The branches were lopped off, and the trees looked long and bare that they were hardly to be recognized. Then they were laid in carts, and the horses dragged them out of the wood. Where did they go to? What became of them? In spring, when the swallows and the storks came, the tree asked them, "Don't you know where they have been taken? Have you not met them anywhere?" The swallows did not know anything about it, but the stork looked musing, nodded his head and said, "Yes, I think I know. I met many ships as I was flying hither from Egypt. On the ships were magnificent masts, and I venture to assert that it was they that smelled so of fur. I may congratulate you, for they lifted themselves on high most majestically. Oh, were I but old enough to fly across the sea! But how does the sea look in reality? What is it like?" "That would take a long time to explain," said the stork, and with these words off he went. "Rejoice in your growth," said the sunbeams. "Rejoice in your vigorous growth and of the young fresh life that moves within you." And the wind kissed the tree, and the dew wept tears over him, but the fir understood it not. When Christmas came, quite young trees were cut down, trees which often were not as large or of the same age as the fir tree, who could never rest but always wanted to be off. These young trees retained their branches. They were laid on carts, and the horses drew them out of the wood. "Where are they going to?" asked the fir. "They are not taller than I. There was one indeed that was considerably shorter. And why do they retain all their branches? Where are they taken?" We know," chirped the sparrows. "We have peeped in at the windows in the town below. We know whither they are taken. The greatest splendor and the greatest magnificence one can imagine await them. We peeped through the windows and saw them planted in the middle of a warm room and ornamented with the most splendid things, with gilded apples, with gingerbread, with toys, and many hundred lights." "And then what happens?" asked the fir tree. "We did not see any more. It was incomparably beautiful." "I would fain know if I'm destined for so glorious a career," cried the tree, rejoicing. "That is still better than to cross the sea. What a longing do I suffer! Were Christmas but come! I am now tall, and my branches spread like the others that were carried off last year. Oh, were I but already on the cart! Were I in the warm room with all the splendor and magnificence! Yes, then something better, something still grander, will surely follow, or wherefore should they thus ornament me? Something better, something still grander must follow, but what? Oh, how I long, how I suffer! I do not know myself. What is the matter with me?" "Rejoice in our presence," said the air and the sunlight. "Rejoice in your own fresh youth." But the tree did not rejoice at all. He grew and was green both winter and summer. People that saw him said, "What a fine tree!" And towards Christmas, he was one of the first that was cut down. The tree fell to the earth with a sigh. He felt a pang. It was like a swoon. He could not think of happiness, for he was sorrowful at being separated from his home, from the place where he had sprung up. He well knew that he should never see his dear old comrades, the little bushes and flowers around him anymore, perhaps not even the birds. The departure was not at all agreeable. The tree only came to himself when he was unloaded in a courtyard with the other trees and heard a man say, "That one is splendid. We don't want the others." Then 2 servants came and carried the fir tree into a large and splendid drawing room. Portraits were hanging on the walls, and near the white porcelain stove stood 2 large Chinese vases with lions on the covers. There, too, were large easy chairs, silken sofas, large tables full of picture books and full of toys, worth hundreds and hundreds of crowns. At least the children said so. And the fir tree was stuck upright in a cask that was filled with sand, but no one could see that it was a cask, for green cloth was hung all round it, and it stood on a large, beautifully colored carpet. Oh, how the tree quivered! What was to happen? The servants, as well as the young ladies, then decorated it. On one branch there hung little nets cut out of colored paper, and each net was filled with sugar plums, and among the other branches gilded apples and walnuts were suspended, looking as though they had grown there, and little blue and white tapers were placed among the leaves. Dolls that looked like men were seen among the foliage, and at the very top a large star of gold tinsel was fixed. It was really splendid, beyond description splendid. This evening, they all said, how it will shine this evening. Oh, thought the tree, if the evening were but come, if the tapers were but lighted, and then I wonder what will happen. Perhaps the other trees from the forest will come to look at me. Perhaps the sparrows will beat against the window panes. I wonder if I shall take root here through winter and summer, covered with ornaments. He knew very much about the matter, but he was so impatient that for sheer longing he got a pain in his back, and this with trees is the same thing as a headache with us. The candles were now lighted. What brightness! What splendor! The tree trembled so that one of the tapers set fire to the foliage. It blazed up famously. "Help! Help!" cried the young ladies, and they quickly put out the fire. Now the tree did not even dare tremble. What a state he was in! He was so uneasy lest he should lose something of his splendor. He was quite bewildered amidst the glare and brightness, when suddenly both folding doors opened, and a troop of children rushed in as if they would upset the tree. The older persons followed quietly. The little ones stood quite still, but it was only for a moment. Then they shouted that the whole place re-echoed with their rejoicing. They danced round the tree, and one present after the other was pulled off. "What is this about?" thought the tree. "What is to happen now?" And the lights burned down to the very branches, and as they burned down, they were put out one after the other, and then the children had permission to plunder the tree. So they fell upon it with such violence that all its branches cracked. If it had not been fixed firmly in the ground, it would certainly have tumbled down. The children danced about with their beautiful playthings. No one looked at the tree except the old nurse, who peeped between the branches, but it was only to see if there was a fig or an apple left that had been forgotten. "A story! A story!" cried the children, drawing a little fat man towards the tree. He seated himself under it and said, "Now we are in the shade, and the tree can listen too. But I shall tell only one story. Now which will you have? The 3 billy goats gruff, or Humpty Dumpty who tumbled downstairs?" "The 3 billy goats," cried some. "Humpty Dumpty," cried the others. There was such a bawling and screaming. The fir tree alone was silent, and he thought to himself, "Am I not to bawl with the rest? Am I to do nothing whatever?" For he was one of the company and had done what he had to do. And the man told about Humpty Dumpty that tumbled down, who notwithstanding came to the throne and at last married the princess. And the children clapped their hands and cried, "Oh, go on, do go on." They wanted to hear about the 3 billy goats Gruff too, but the little man only told them about Humpty Dumpty. The fir tree stood quite still and absorbed in thought. The birds in the wood had never related the like of this. Humpty Dumpty fell downstairs, and yet he married the princess. Yes, yes, that's the way of the world, thought the fir tree, and believed it all, because the man who told the story was so good-looking. Well, well, who knows? Perhaps I may fall downstairs too, and get a princess as wife. And he looked forward with joy to the morrow, when he hoped to be decked out again with lights, playthings, fruits, and tinsel. I won't tremble tomorrow, thought the fir tree. I will enjoy to the full all my splendor. And the whole night the tree stood still and deep in thought. In the morning, the servant and the housemaid came in. Now then, the splendor will begin again, thought the fir. But they dragged him out of the room and up the stairs into the loft, and here, in a dark corner where no daylight could enter, they left him. What's the meaning of this? Thought the tree. What am I to do here? What shall I hear now, I wonder? And he leaned against the wall, lost in reverie. Time enough had he, too, for his reflections. For days and nights passed on, and nobody came up, and when at last somebody did come, it was only to put some great trunks in a corner out of the way. There stood the tree quite hidden. It seemed as if he had been entirely forgotten. "'Tis now winter out of doors," thought the tree. "The earth is hard and covered with snow. Men cannot plant me now, and therefore I have been put up here under shelter till the springtime comes. How thoughtful that is! How kind man is after all! If it only were not so dark here, and so terribly lonely. Not even a hare. And out in the woods it was so pleasant, when the snow was on the ground and the hare leaped by. Yes, even when he jumped over me, but I didn't like it then. It is really terribly lonely here." "Squeak, squeak," said a little mouse at the same moment, peeping out of his hole. And then another little one came. They snuffed about the fir tree and rustled among the branches. "It is dreadfully cold," said the mouse. "But for that, it would be delightful here, old fir, wouldn't it?" "I am by no means old," said the fir tree. "There's many a one considerably older than I am." "Where do you come from?" asked the mice, "and what can you do?" They were so extremely curious. "Tell us about the most beautiful spot on the earth. Have you never been there? Were you never in the larder, where cheeses lie on the shelves and hams hang far above, where one dances about on tallow candles, that place where one enters lean and comes out again fat and portly?" "I know no such place," said the tree, "but I know the wood, where the sun shines and where the little birds sing." And then he told all about his youth, and the little mice had never heard the like before, and they listened and said, "Well, to be sure, how much you have seen! How happy you must have been!" "Aye," said the fir tree, thinking over what he had himself related. "Yes, in reality, those were happy times." And then he told about Christmas Eve, when he was decked out with cakes and candles. "Oh," said the little mice, "how fortunate you have been, old fir tree." "I am by no means old," said he. "I came from the wood this winter. I'm in my prime, and am only rather short for my age." "What delightful stories you know," said the mice. And the next night they came with 4 other little mice, who were to hear what the tree recounted. And the more he related, the more he remembered himself, and it appeared as if those times had really been happy times. But they may still come. Humpty Dumpty fell downstairs, and yet he got a princess. And he thought at the moment of a nice little birch tree growing out in the woods that would be a real charming princess. "Who is Humpty Dumpty?" asked the mice. So then the fir tree told the whole fairy tale, for he could remember every single word of it, and the little mice jumped for joy up to the very top of the tree. Next night, 2 more mice came, and on Sunday 2 rats even, but they said the stories were not interesting, which vexed the little mice, and they too now began to think them not so very amusing either. "Do you know only one story?" asked the rats. "Only that one," answered the tree. "I heard it on my happiest evening, but I did not then know how happy I was." "It is a very stupid story. Don't you know one about bacon and tallow candles? Can't you tell any larger stories?" "No," said the tree. "Then goodbye," said the rats, and they went home. At last, the little mice stayed away also, and the tree sighed. After all, it was very pleasant when the sleek little mice sat round me and listened to what I told them. Now that too is over. But I will take good care to enjoy myself when I am brought out again. But when was that to be? One morning there came a quantity of people and set to work in the loft. The trunks were moved, the tree was pulled out and thrown rather hard down on the floor. Then a man drew him towards the stairs where the daylight shone. Now a merry life will begin again, thought the tree. He felt the fresh air, the first sunbeam, and now he was out in the courtyard. All passed so quickly. There was so much going on around him, the tree quite forgot to look to himself. The court adjoined a garden, and all was in flower. "Now then, I shall really enjoy life," said he exultingly, and spread out his branches. But, alas, they were all withered and yellow. It was in a corner that he lay, among weeds and nettles. The golden star of tinsel was still on top of the tree and glittered in the sunshine. In the courtyard, some of the merry children were playing who had danced at Christmas round the fir tree, and were so glad at the sight of him. One of the youngest ran and tore off the golden star. "Look what is still on the ugly old Christmas tree," said he, trampling on the branches so that they all cracked beneath his feet. And the tree beheld all the beauty of the flowers and the freshness in the garden. He beheld himself and wished he had remained in his dark corner in the loft. He thought of his first youth in the wood, of the merry Christmas Eve, and of the little mice who had listened with so much pleasure to the story of Humpty Dumpty. "'Tis over, 'tis past," said the poor tree. "Had I but rejoiced when I had reason to do so, but now 'tis past, 'tis past." And the gardener's boy chopped the tree into small pieces. There was a whole heap lying there. The wood flamed up splendidly under the large brewing copper, and it sighed so deeply. Each sigh was like a shot. The boys played about in the court, and the youngest wore the gold star on his breast, which the tree had had on the happiest evening of his life. However, that was over now, the tree gone, the story at an end. All was over. every tale must end at last. Santa Claus lives in the Laughing Valley, where stands the big, rambling castle in which his toys are manufactured. His workmen, selected from the rails, nooks, pixies, and fairies, live with him, and everyone is as busy as he can be from one year's end to another. It is called the Laughing Valley because everything there is happy. The brook chuckles to itself as it leaps rollicking between its green banks. The wind whistles merrily in the trees. The sunbeams dance lightly over the soft grass, and the violets and wildflowers look smilingly up from their green nests. To laugh, one needs to be happy. To be happy, one needs to be content. And throughout the Laughing Valley of Santa Claus, contentment reigns supreme. On one side is the mighty forest Burzee. At the other side stands the huge mountain that contains the cave of the demons, and between them the valley lies smiling and peaceful. One would think that our good old Santa Claus, who devotes his days to making children happy, would have no enemies on all the earth, and, as a matter of fact, for a long period of time, he encountered nothing but love wherever he might go. But the demons who live in the mountain caves grew to hate Santa Claus very much, and all for the simple reason that he made children happy. The caves of demons are 5 in number. A broad pathway leads up to the first cave, which is a finely arched cavern at the foot of the mountain, the entrance being beautifully carved and decorated. In it resides the demon of selfishness. Back of this is another cavern inhabited by the demon of envy. The cave of the demon of hatred is next in order, and through this one passes to the home of the demon of malice, situated in a dark and fearful cave in the very heart of the mountain. I do not know what lies beyond this. Some say there are terrible pitfalls leading to death and destruction, and this may very well be true. However, from each one of the 4 caves mentioned, there is a small, narrow tunnel leading to the 5th cave, a cozy little room occupied by the demon of repentance. And as the rocky floors of these passages are well worn by the track of passing feet, I judge that many wanderers in the caves of the demons have escaped through the tunnels to the abode of the demon of repentance, who is said to be a pleasant sort of fellow, who gladly opens for one a little door admitting you into fresh air and sunshine again. Well, these demons of the caves, thinking they had great cause to dislike old Santa Claus, held a meeting one day to discuss the matter. "I'm really getting lonesome," said the demon of selfishness, "for Santa Claus distributes so many pretty gifts to all the children that they become happy and generous through his example and keep away from my cave." "I'm having the same trouble," rejoined the demon of envy. "The little ones seem quite content with Santa Claus, and there are few, indeed, that I can coax to become envious." "And that makes it bad for me," declared the demon of hatred. "For if no children pass through the caves of selfishness and envy, none can get to my cavern." "Or to mine," added the demon of malice. "For my part," said the demon of repentance, It is easily seen that if children do not visit your caves, they have no need to visit mine, so that I am quite as neglected as you are. And all because of this person they call Santa Claus, exclaimed the demon of envy. He is simply ruining our business, and something must be done at once. To this they readily agreed, but what to do was another and more difficult matter to settle. They knew that Santa Claus worked all through the year at his castle in the Laughing Valley, preparing the gifts he was to distribute on Christmas Eve, and at first they resolved to try to tempt him into their caves, that they might lead him on to the terrible pitfalls that ended in destruction. So the very next day, while Santa Claus was busily at work, surrounded by his little band of assistants, the demon of selfishness came to him and said, "These toys are wonderfully bright and pretty. Why do you not keep them for yourself? It's a pity to give them to those noisy boys and fretful girls who break and destroy them so quickly." "Nonsense," cried the old graybeard, his bright eyes twinkling merrily as he turned toward the tempting demon. "The boys and girls are never so noisy and fretful after receiving my presents, and if I can make them happy for one day in the year, I am quite content." So the demon went back to the others, who awaited him in their caves, and said, "I have failed, for Santa Claus is not at all selfish." The following day, the demon of envy visited Santa Claus. He said, "The toy shops are full of playthings quite as pretty as those you are making. What a shame it is that they should interfere with your business. They make toys by machinery much quicker than you can make them by hand, and they sell them for money, while you get nothing at all for your work." But Santa Claus refused to be envious of the toy shops. "I can supply the little ones but once a year, on Christmas Eve," he answered, "for the children are many, and I am but one. And as my work is one of love and kindness, I would be ashamed to receive money for my little gifts. But throughout all the year, the children must be amused in some way, and so the toy shops are able to bring much happiness to my little friends. I like the toy shops, and am glad to see them prosper." In spite of the second rebuff, the demon of hatred thought he would try to influence Santa Claus. So the next day he entered the busy workshop and said, "Good morning, Santa. I have bad news for you." "Then run away like a good fellow," answered Santa Claus. "Bad news is something that should be kept secret and never told." "You cannot escape this, however," declared the demon, "for in the world are a good many who do not believe in Santa Claus, and these you are bound to hate bitterly, since they have so wronged you." "Stuff and rubbish," cried Santa. "And there are others who resent you making children happy, and who sneer at you and call you foolish. You are quite right to hate such base slanderers, and you ought to be revenged upon them for their evil words." "But I don't hate 'em," exclaimed Santa Claus positively. "Such people do me no real harm, but merely render themselves and their children unhappy. Poor things, I'd much rather help them any day than injure them." Indeed, the demons could not tempt old Santa Claus in any way. On the contrary, he was shrewd enough to see that their object in visiting him was to make mischief and trouble, and his cheery laughter disconcerted the evil ones and showed to them the folly of such an undertaking. So they abandoned honeyed words and determined to use force. It was well known that no harm can come to Santa Claus while he is in the Laughing Valley, for the fairies and rails and nooks all protect him. But on Christmas Eve, he drives his reindeer out into the big world, carrying a sleigh load of toys and pretty gifts to the children. And this was the time and the occasion when his enemies had the best chance to injure him. So the demons laid their plans and awaited the arrival of Christmas Eve. The moon shone big and white in the sky, and the snow lay crisp and sparkling on the ground as Santa Claus cracked his whip and sped away out of the valley into the great world beyond. The roomy sleigh was packed full with huge sacks of toys, and as the reindeer dashed onward, our jolly old Santa laughed and whistled and sang for very joy. For in all his merry life, this was the one day in the year when he was the happiest, the day he lovingly bestowed the treasures of his workshop upon the little children. It would be a busy night for him, he well knew. As he whistled and shouted and cracked his whip again, he reviewed in mind all the towns and cities and farmhouses where he was expected, and figured that he had just enough presents to go around and make every child happy. The reindeer knew exactly what was expected of them, and dashed along so swiftly that their feet scarcely seemed to touch the snow-covered ground. Suddenly, a strange thing happened. A rope shot through the moonlight, and a big noose that was in the end of it settled over the arms and body of Santa Claus and drew tight. Before he could resist, or even cry out, he was jerked from the seat of the sleigh and tumbled head foremost into a snowbank, while the reindeer rushed onward with the load of toys and carried it quickly out of sight and sound. Such a surprising experience confused old Santa for a moment, and when he had collected his senses, he found that the wicked demons had pulled him from the snowdrift and bound him tightly with many coils of the stout rope, and then they carried the kidnapped Santa Claus away to their mountain, where they thrust the prisoner into a secret cave and chained him to the rocky wall so that he could not escape. "Ha ha!" laughed the demons, rubbing their hands together with cruel glee. "What will the children do now? How they will cry and scold and storm when they find there are no toys in their stockings and no gifts on their Christmas trees. And what a lot of punishment they will receive from their parents, and how they will flock to our caves of selfishness and envy and hatred and malice. We have done a mighty clever thing, we demons of the caves." Now it so chanced that on this Christmas Eve, the good Santa Claus had taken with him in his sleigh Neuter the rail, Peter the Nook, Kilter the Pixie, and a small fairy named Whisk, his 4 favorite assistants. These little people he had often found very useful in helping him to distribute his gifts to the children, and when their master was so suddenly dragged from the sleigh, they were all snugly tucked under the seat, where the sharp wind could not reach them. The tiny immortals knew nothing of the capture of Santa Claus until some time after he had disappeared. But finally, they missed his cheery voice, and as their master always sang or whistled on his journeys, the silence warned them that something was wrong. Little Whisk stuck out his head from underneath the seat and found Santa Claus gone and no one to direct the flight of the reindeer. "Whoa!" he called out, and the deer obediently slackened speed and came to a halt. Peter and Neuter and Kilter all jumped upon the seat and looked back over the track made by the sleigh. But Santa Claus had been left miles and miles behind. "What shall we do?" asked Whisk anxiously, all the mirth and mischief banished from his wee face by this great calamity. "We must go back at once and find our master," said Neuter the rail, who thought and spoke with much deliberation. "No, no," exclaimed Peter the Knook, who, cross and crabbed though he was, might always be depended upon in an emergency. "If we delay or go back, there will not be time to get the toys to the children before morning, and that would grieve Santa Claus more than anything else. It is certain that some wicked creatures have captured him," added Kilter thoughtfully, "and their object must be to make the children unhappy. So our first duty is to get the toys distributed as carefully as if Santa Claus were himself present. Afterward, we can search for our master and easily secure his freedom." This seemed such good and sensible advice that the others at once resolved to adopt it. So Peter the Knook called to the reindeer, and the faithful animals again sprang forward and dashed over hill and valley, through forest and plain, until they came to the houses wherein children lay sleeping and dreaming of the pretty gifts they would find on Christmas morning. The little immortals had set themselves a difficult task, for although they had assisted Santa Claus on many of his journeys, their master had always directed and guided them and told them exactly what he wished them to do. But now they had to distribute the toys according to their own judgment, and they did not understand children as well as did old Santa, so it is no wonder they made some laughable errors. Mamie Brown, who wanted a doll, got a drum instead, and a drum is of no use to a girl who loves dolls. And Charlie Smith, who delights to romp and play out of doors, and who wanted some new rubber boots to keep his feet dry, received a sewing box filled with colored worsteds and threads and needles, which made him so provoked that he thoughtlessly called our dear Santa Claus a fraud. Had there been many such mistakes, the demons would have accomplished their evil purpose and made the children unhappy. But the little friends of the absent Santa Claus labored faithfully and intelligently to carry out their master's ideas, and they made fewer errors than might be expected under such unusual circumstances. Although they worked as swiftly as possible, day had begun to break before the toys and other presents were all distributed. So for the first time in many years, the reindeer trotted into the Laughing Valley on their return in broad daylight, with the brilliant sun peeping over the edge of the forest to prove they were far behind their accustomed hours. Having put the deer in the stable, the little folk began to wonder how they might rescue their master, and they realized they must discover, first of all, what had happened to him and where he was. So Whisk, the fairy, transported himself to the bower of the Fairy Queen, which was located deep in the heart of the forest of Burzee. And once there, it did not take him long to find out all about the naughty demons and how they had kidnapped the good Santa Claus to prevent his making children happy. The Fairy Queen also promised her assistance, and then, fortified by this powerful support, Whisk flew back to where Neuter and Peter and Kilter awaited him, and the four counseled together and laid plans to rescue their master from his enemies. It is possible that Santa Claus was not as merry as usual during the night that succeeded his capture, for although he had faith in the judgment of his little friends, he could not avoid a certain amount of worry and an anxious look would creep at times into his kind old eyes as he thought of the disappointment that might await his dear little children. And the demons, who guarded him by turns, one after another, did not neglect to taunt him with contemptuous words in his helpless condition. When Christmas Day dawned, the demon of malice was guarding the prisoner, and his tongue was sharper than that of any of the others. "The children are waking up, Santa," he cried. "They are waking up to find their stockings empty. Ho, ho, how they will quarrel and wail and stamp their feet in anger. Our caves will be full today, old Santa. Our caves are sure to be full." But to this, as to other like taunts, Santa Claus answered nothing. He was much grieved by his capture, it is true, but his courage did not forsake him. And, finding that the prisoner would not reply to his jeers, the demon of malice presently went away and sent the demon of repentance to take his place. This last personage was not so disagreeable as the others. He had gentle and refined features, and his voice was soft and pleasant in tone. "My brother demons do not trust me overmuch," said he, as he entered the cavern. "But it is morning now, and the mischief is done. You cannot visit the children again for another year." "That is true," answered Santa Claus, almost cheerfully. "Christmas Eve is past, and for the first time in centuries I have not visited my children." "The little ones will be greatly disappointed," murmured the demon of repentance, almost regretfully. "But that cannot be helped now. Their grief is likely to make the children selfish and envious and hateful, and if they come to the caves of the demons today, I shall get a chance to lead some of them to my cave of repentance." "Do you never repent yourself?" asked Santa Claus curiously. "Oh, yes, indeed," answered the demon. "I am even now repenting that I assisted in your capture. Of course, it is too late to remedy the evil that has been done, but repentance, you know, can come only after an evil thought or deed, for in the beginning there is nothing to repent of." "So I understand," said Santa Claus. "Those who avoid evil need never visit your cave." "As a rule, that is true," replied Demon. "Yet you, who have done no evil, are about to visit my cave at once, for to prove that I sincerely regret my share in your capture, I am going to permit you to escape." This speech greatly surprised the prisoner, until he reflected that it was just what might be expected of the demon of repentance. The fellow at once busied himself untying the knots that bound Santa Claus and unlocking the chains that fastened him to the wall. Then he led the way through a long tunnel until they both emerged in the cave of repentance. "I hope you will forgive me," said the demon pleadingly. "I am not really a bad person, you know, and I believe I accomplish a great deal of good in the world." With this, he opened a back door that let in a flood of sunshine, and Santa Claus sniffed the fresh air gratefully. "I bear no malice," said he to the demon in a gentle voice, "and I'm sure the world would be a dreary place without you. So, good morning, and a Merry Christmas to you." With these words, he stepped out to greet the bright morning, and a moment later he was trudging along, whistling softly to himself, on his way to his home in the Laughing Valley. Marching over the snow toward the mountain was a vast army made up of the most curious creatures imaginable. There were numberless knooks from the forest, as rough and crooked in appearance as the gnarled branches of the trees they ministered to, and there were dainty rails from the fields, each one bearing the emblem of the flower or plant it guarded. Behind these were many ranks of pixies, gnomes, and nymphs, and in the rear 1,000 beautiful fairies floated along in a gorgeous array. This wonderful army was led by Whisk, Peter, Neuter, and Kilter, who had assembled it to rescue Santa Claus from captivity and to punish the demons who had dared to take him away from his beloved children. And although they looked so bright and peaceful, the little immortals were armed with powers that would be very terrible to those who had incurred their anger. Woe to the demons of the caves if this mighty army of vengeance ever met them. But lo, coming to meet his loyal friends, appeared the imposing form of Santa Claus, his white beard floating in the breeze, and his bright eyes sparkling with pleasure at this proof of the love and veneration he had inspired in the hearts of the most powerful creatures in existence. And while they clustered around him and danced with glee at his safe return, he gave them earnest thanks for their support. But Whisk and Neuter and Peter and Kilter he embraced affectionately. "It is useless to pursue the demons," said Santa Claus to the army. "They have their place in the world and can never be destroyed. But that is a great pity, nevertheless," he continued musingly. So the fairies and nooks and pixies and rails all escorted the good man to his castle, and there left him to talk over the events of the night with his little assistants. Whisk had already rendered himself invisible and flown through the big world to see how the children were getting along on this bright Christmas morning, and by the time he returned, Peter had finished telling Santa Claus of how they had distributed the toys. "We really did very well," cried the fairy in a pleased voice, "for I found little unhappiness among the children this morning. Still, you must not get captured again, my dear master, for we might not be so fortunate another time in carrying out your ideas." He then related the mistakes that had been made and which he had not discovered until his tour of inspection, and Santa Claus at once sent him with rubber boots for Charlie Smith and a doll for Mamie Brown, so that even those two disappointed ones became happy. As for the wicked demons of the caves, they were filled with anger when they found that their clever capture of Santa Claus had come to naught. Indeed, no one on that Christmas day appeared to be at all selfish or envious or hateful, and realizing that while the children's saint had so many powerful friends, it was folly to oppose him, the demons never again attempted to interfere with his journeys on Christmas Eve. "I'm so tired of Christmas. I wish there would never be another one," exclaimed an unhappy-looking little girl who sat watching her mother arrange a pile of gifts 2 days before they were to be given. "Why, Effie, what a dreadful thing to say. You're as bad as old Scrooge. I'm afraid something will happen to you as it did to him if you don't care for dear Christmas," answered Mamma, almost dropping the silver horn she was filling with delicious candies. "Who's Scrooge? What happened to him?" asked Effie, with a glimmer of interest in her listless face as she picked out the sourest lemon drop she could find, for nothing sweet suited her just then. "He was one of Dickens' best people, and you can read the charming story some day. He hated Christmas until a strange dream showed him how dear and beautiful it was and made a better man of him. I shall read it, for I like dreams and have a great many curious ones myself, but they don't keep me from being tired of Christmas, said Effie. Why are you tired of what should be the happiest time of all the year? Asked Mamma anxiously. Perhaps I shouldn't be if I had something new, but it's always the same, and there isn't any more surprise about it. I always find heaps of goodies in my stocking, don't like some of them, and soon get tired of those I do like. We always have a great dinner, and I eat too much and feel ill next day. Then there's a Christmas tree somewhere with a doll on top, or a stupid old Santa Claus, and children dancing and screaming over bonbons and toys that break. Really, Mama, I've had so many Christmases all alike that I don't think I can bear another one. And Effie laid herself flat on the sofa, as if the mere idea was too much for her. Her mother laughed at her despair, but was sorry to see her little girl so discontented when she had everything to make her happy and had known but 10 Christmas days. Suppose we don't give you any presents at all? How would that suit you? Asked Mamma, anxious to please her spoiled child. I should like one large and splendid one, and one dear little one to remember some very nice person by, said Effie, who was a fanciful little body full of odd whims and notions which her friends loved to gratify, regardless of time, trouble, or money, for she was the last of 3 little girls and very dear to all the family. Well, my darling, I will see what I can do to please you, and not say a word until all is ready. If I could only get an idea to start with. And Mamma went on tying up her pretty bundles with a thoughtful face, while Effie strolled to the window to watch the rain that kept her indoors and made her dismal. Seems to me poor children have better times than rich ones. I can't go out, and there's a girl about my age splashing along without any maid to fuss about rubbers and cloaks and umbrellas and colds. I wish I was a beggar girl. Would you like to be hungry, cold, and ragged, to beg all day, and sleep on an ash heap at night? Asked Mamma, wondering what would come next. Cinderella did, and had a nice time in the end. The girl out there has a basket of scraps on her arm and a big old shawl around her, and doesn't seem to care a bit, though the water runs out of the toes of her boots. She goes paddling along, laughing at the rain, and eating a cold potato as if it tasted nicer than the chicken and ice cream I had for dinner. Yes, I do think poor children are happier than rich ones. So do I sometimes. At the orphan asylum today, I saw 24 merry little souls who have no parents, no home, and no hope of Christmas beyond a stick of candy or a cake. I wish you had been there to see how happy they were playing with the old toys some richer children had sent them. You may give them all mine. I'm so tired of them I never want to see them again, said Effie, turning from the window to the pretty baby house full of everything a child's heart could desire. I will, and let you begin again with something you will not tire of, if I can only find it. And Mamma knit her brows, trying to discover some grand surprise for this child who didn't care for Christmas. Nothing more was said then, and wandering off to the library, Effie found A Christmas Carol, and curling herself up in the sofa corner, read it all before tea. Some of it she did not understand, but she laughed and cried over many parts of the charming story and felt better without knowing why. All the evening she thought of poor Tiny Tim, Mrs. Cratchit with the pudding, and the stout old gentleman who danced so happily that his legs twinkled in the air. Presently, bedtime arrived. "Come now and toast your feet," said Effie's nurse, "while I do your pretty hair and tell you stories." "I'll have a fairy tale tonight, a very interesting one," commanded Effie, as she put on her blue silk wrapper and little fur-lined slippers to sit before the fire and have her long curls brushed. So Nursey told her best tales, and when at last the child lay down under her lace curtains, her head was full of a curious jumble of Christmas elves, poor children, snowstorms, sugar plums, and surprises. So it is no wonder that she dreamed all night, and this was the dream which she never quite forgot. She found herself sitting on a stone in the middle of a great field, all alone. The snow was falling fast, a bitter wind whistled by, and night was coming on. She felt hungry, cold, and tired, and did not know where to go nor what to do. "I wanted to be a beggar girl, and now I am one, but I don't like it, and wish somebody would come and take care of me. I don't know who I am, and I think I must be lost," thought Effie, with the curious interest one takes in oneself in dreams. But the more she thought about it, the more bewildered she felt. Faster fell the snow, colder blew the wind, darker grew the night, and poor Effie made up her mind that she was quite forgotten and left to freeze alone. The tears were chilled on her cheeks, her feet felt like icicles, and her heart died within her. So hungry, frightened, and forlorn was she. Laying her head on her knees, she gave herself up for lost, and sat there with the great flakes fast turning her to a little white mound, when suddenly the sound of music reached her, and starting up, she looked and listened with all her eyes and ears. Far away, a dim light shone, and a voice was heard singing. She tried to run toward the welcome glimmer, but could not stir, and stood like a small statue of expectation while the light drew nearer and the sweet words of the song grew clearer. A child's voice sang. A child's hand carried the little candle, and in the circle of soft light it shed, Effie saw a pretty child coming to her through the night and snow. A rosy, smiling creature, wrapped in white fur, with a wreath of green and scarlet holly on its shining hair, the magic candle in one hand, and the other outstretched as if to shower gifts and warmly press all other hands. Effie forgot to speak as this bright vision came nearer, leaving no trace of footsteps in the snow, only lighting the way with its little candle and filling the air with the music of its song. "Dear child, you are lost, and I have come to find you," said the stranger, taking Effie's cold hands in his with a smile like sunshine, while every holly berry glowed like a little fire. "Do you know me?" asked Effie, feeling no fear but a great gladness at his coming. "I know all children and go to find them, for this is my holiday, and I gather them from all parts of the world to be merry with me once a year." "Are you an angel?" asked Effie, looking for the wings. "No, I'm a Christmas spirit, and live with my mates in a pleasant place, getting ready for our holiday, when we are let out to roam about the world, helping make this a happy time for all who will let us in. Will you come and see how we work?" "I will go anywhere with you. Don't leave me again," cried Effie gladly. "First I will make you comfortable, That is what we love to do. You are cold and you shall be warm. Hungry and I will feed you. Sorrowful and I will make you happy. With a wave of his candle, all three miracles were wrought, for the snowflakes turned to a white fur cloak and hood on Effie's head and shoulders. A bowl of hot soup came sailing to her lips and vanished when she had eagerly drunk the last drop. And suddenly, the dismal field changed to a new world so full of wonders that all her troubles were forgotten in a minute. Bells were ringing so merrily that it was hard to keep from dancing. Green garlands hung on the walls, and every tree was a Christmas tree full of toys and blazing with candles that never went out. In one place, many little spirits sewed like mad on warm clothes, turning off work faster than any sewing machine ever invented, and great piles were made ready to be sent to poor people. Other busy creatures packed money into purses and wrote checks which they sent flying away on the wind, a lovely kind of snowstorm to fall into a world below full of poverty. Older and graver spirits were looking over piles of little books in which the records of the past year were kept, telling how different people had spent it and what sort of gifts they deserved. Some got peace, some disappointment, some remorse and sorrow, some great joy and hope. The rich had generous thoughts sent them, the poor gratitude and contentment. Children had more love and duty to parents, and parents renewed patience and wisdom and satisfaction for and in their children. No one was forgotten. "Please tell me what splendid place this is," asked Effie, as soon as she could collect her wits after the first look at all these astonishing things. "This is the Christmas world, and here we work all year round, never tired of getting ready for the happy day. See, these are the saints just setting off, for some have far to go, and the children must not be disappointed." As he spoke, the spirit pointed to 4 gates, out of which 4 great sleighs were just driving, laden with toys, while a jolly old Santa Claus sat in the middle of each, drawing on his mittens and tucking up his wraps for a long, cold drive. "Why, I thought there was only one Santa Claus, and even he was a humbug," cried Effie, astonished at the sight. Never give up your faith in the sweet old stones, even after you come to see that they are only the pleasant shadow of a lovely truth. Just then, the sleighs went off with a great jingling of bells and pattering of reindeer hoofs, while all the spirits gave a cheer that was heard in the lower world, where people said, "Hear the stars sing." I will never say there isn't a Santa Claus again. Now show me more. You will like to see this place, I think, and may learn something here perhaps. The spirit smiled as he led the way to a little door, through which Effie peeped into a world of dolls. Baby houses were in full blast, with dolls of all sorts going on like live people. Waxen ladies sat in their parlors elegantly dressed. Nurses walked out with bits of dollies, and the streets were full of tin soldiers marching, wooden horses prancing, express wagons rumbling, and little men hurrying to and fro. Shops were there, and tiny people buying legs of mutton, pounds of tea, mites of clothes, and everything dolls use or wear or want. But presently she saw that in some ways the dolls improved upon the manners and customs of human beings, and she watched eagerly to learn why they did these things. A fine Paris doll, driving in her carriage, took up a black worsted Dinah who was hobbling along with a basket of clean clothes and carried her to her journey's end as if it were the proper thing to do. Another interesting China lady took off her comfortable red cloak and put it round a poor wooden creature done up in a paper shift and so badly painted that its face would have sent some babies into fits. Seems to me I once knew a rich girl who didn't give her things to poor girls. I wish I could remember who she was and tell her to be as kind as that china doll, said Effie, much touched at the sweet way the pretty creature wrapped up the poor fright, and then ran off in her little gray gown to buy a shiny fowl stuck on a wooden platter for her invalid mother's dinner. We recall these things to people's minds by dreams. I think the girl you speak of won't forget this one, and the spirit smiled as if he enjoyed some joke which she did not see. A little bell rang as she looked, and away scampered the children into the red and green schoolhouse with the roof that lifted up, so one could see how nicely they sat at their desks with mites of books, or drew on the inch-square blackboards with crumbs of chalk. They know their lessons very well and are as still as mice. We make a great racket at our school and get bad marks every day. I shall tell the girls they had better mind what they do, or their dolls will be better scholars than they are, said Effie, much impressed, as she peeped in and saw no rod in the hand of the little mistress, who looked up and shook her head at the intruder as if begging her to go away before the order of the school was disturbed. Effie retired at once, but could not resist one look in at the window of a fine mansion where the family were at dinner. The children behaved so well at table and never grumbled a bit when their mamma said they could not have any more fruit. "Now, show me something else," she said, as they came again to the low door that led out of Dollland. "You have seen how we prepare for Christmas. Let me show you where we love best to send our good and happy gifts," answered the spirit, giving her his hand again. "I know, I've seen ever so many," began Effie, thinking of her own Christmases. "No, you haven't seen what I will show you. Come away and remember what you see tonight." Like a flash, that bright world vanished, and Effie found herself in a part of the city she had never seen before. It was far away from the happier places, where every store was brilliant with lights and full of pretty things, and every house wore a festival air while people hurried to and fro with merry greetings. It was down among the dingy streets where the poor lived, and where there was no making ready for Christmas. Hungry women looked in at the shabby shops, longing to buy meat and bread, but empty pockets forbade. Tipsy men drank up their wages in the bar rooms, and in many cold dark chambers, little children huddled under the thin blankets, trying to forget their misery in sleep. No nice dinners filled the air with savory smells. No merry trees dropped toys and bonbons into eager hands. No little stockings hung in rows beside the chimney piece ready to be filled. No happy sounds of music or happy voices or dancing feet were heard, and there were no signs of Christmas anywhere. "Don't they have any in this place?" asked Effie, shivering as she held fast the spirit's hand, following where he led her. "We come to bring it. Let me show you our best workers." And the spirit pointed to some sweet-faced men and women who came stealing into the poor houses, working such beautiful miracles that Effie could only stand and watch. Some slipped money into the empty pockets and sent the happy mothers to buy all the comforts they needed. Others led the drunken men out of temptation and took them home to find safer pleasures there. Fires were kindled on cold hearths, tables spread as if by magic, and warm clothes wrapped around shivering limbs. Flowers suddenly bloomed in the chambers of the sick. Old people found themselves remembered. Sad hearts were consoled by a tender word, and wicked ones softened by the story of him who forgave all sin. But the sweetest work was for the children, and Effie held her breath to watch these human fairies hang up and fill the little stockings without which a child's Christmas is not perfect, putting in things that once she would have thought very humble presents, but which now seemed beautiful and precious because these poor babies had nothing. "That is so beautiful. I wish I could make Merry Christmases as these good people do, and be loved and thanked as they are," said Effie softly, as she watched the busy men and women do their work and steal away without thinking of any reward but their own satisfaction. "You can if you will. I have shown you the way. Try it and see how happy your own holiday will be hereafter." As he spoke, the spirit seemed to put his arms about her and vanished with a kiss. "Oh, stay and show me more," cried Effie, trying to hold him fast. "Darling, wake up. Tell me why you're smiling in your sleep," said a voice in her ear, and opening her eyes, there was Mama bending over her and morning sunshine streaming into the room. "Are they all gone? Did you hear the bells? Wasn't it splendid?" she asked, rubbing her eyes and looking about her for the pretty child who was so real and sweet. "You've been dreaming at a great rate, talking in your sleep, laughing and clapping your hands as if you were cheering someone. Tell me what was so splendid," said Mama, smoothing the tumbled hair and lifting up the sleepy head. Then, while she was being dressed, Effie told her dream, and Nursey thought it very wonderful. But Mama smiled to see how curiously things the child had thought, read, heard, and seen through the day were mixed up in her sleep. "The spirit said I could work lovely miracles if I tried, but I don't know how to begin, for I have no magic candle to make feasts appear and light up groves of Christmas trees as he did," said Effie sorrowfully. "Yes, you have. We will do it. We will do it." And clapping her hands, Mama suddenly began to dance all over the room as if she had lost her wits. "How? How? You must tell me, Mama," cried Effie, dancing after her and ready to believe anything possible when she remembered the adventures of the past night. I've got it, the new idea, a splendid one, if I can only carry it out." And Mama waltzed the little girl round till her curls flew wildly in the air, while Nursey laughed as if she would die. Tell me, shrieked Effie. No, it is a surprise, a grand surprise for Christmas Day, sung Mama, evidently charmed with her happy thought. Now come to breakfast, for we must work like bees if we want to play spirits tomorrow. You and Nursey will go out shopping and get heaps of things, while I'll arrange matters behind the scenes. It won't be a surprise, for I know you're going to ask some poor children here and have a tree or something. It won't be like my dream, for they had ever so many trees and more children than we can find anywhere. There will be no tree, no party, no dinner in this house at all, and no presents for you. Won't that be a surprise?" And Mama laughed at Effie's bewildered face. "Do it. I shall like it, I think, and I won't ask any questions, so it will all burst upon me when the time comes," she said, and she ate her breakfast thoughtfully, for this really would be a new sort of Christmas. All that morning, Effie trotted after Nursey in and out of shops, buying dozens of barking dogs, woolly lambs, and squeaking birds, tiny tea sets, cheery picture books, mittens and hoods, dolls and candy. Parcel after parcel was sent home, but when Effie returned, she saw no trace of them, though she peeped everywhere. Nursey chuckled, but wouldn't give a hint, and went out again in the afternoon with a long list of more things to buy, while Effie wandered forlornly about the house, missing the usual merry stir that went before the Christmas dinner and the evening fun. As for Mamma, she was quite invisible all day and came in at night so tired that she could only lie on the sofa to rest, smiling as if some very pleasant thought made her happy in spite of weariness. "Is the surprise going on all right?" asked Effie anxiously, for it seemed an immense time to wait till another evening came. "Beautifully. Better than I expected, for several of my good friends are helping, or I couldn't have done it as I wish. I know you will like it, dear, and long remember this new way of making Christmas merry." Mamma gave her a very tender kiss, and Effie went to bed. The next day was a very strange one, for when she woke there was no stocking to examine, no pile of gifts under her napkin. No one said Merry Christmas to her, and the dinner was just as usual to her. Mamma vanished again, and Nursey kept wiping her eyes and saying, "The dear things is the prettiest idea I've ever heard of. No one but your blessed Ma could have done it." "Do stop, Nursey, or I shall go crazy because I don't know the secret," cried Effie more than once, and she kept her eye on the clock, for at 7 in the evening the surprise was to come off. The longed-for hour arrived at last, and the child was too excited to ask questions when Nurse put on her cloak and hood, led her to the carriage, and they drove away, leaving their house the one dark and silent one in the row. "I feel like the girls in the fairy tales, who were led off to strange places and see fine things," said Effie in a whisper as they jingled through the happy streets. "Ah, my dearie, it is like a fairy tale, I do assure you, and you will see finer things than most children will tonight. Steady now, and do just as I tell you, and don't say one word whatever you see," answered Nursey, quite quivering with excitement as she patted a large box in her lap and nodded and laughed with twinkling eyes. They drove into a dark yard, and Effie was led through a back door to a little room where Nurse coolly proceeded to take off not only her cloak and hood, but her dress and shoes also. Effie stared and bit her lips, but kept still until out of the box came a little white fur coat and boots, a wreath of holly leaves and berries, and a candle with a frill of gold paper round it. A long "Oh" escaped her then, and when she was dressed and saw herself in the glass, she started back, exclaiming, "Why, Nursey, I look like the spirit in my dream." "So you do, and that's the part you are to play, my pretty. Now be still while I blind your eyes and put you in your place." "Shall I be afraid?" whispered Effie, full of wonder, for as they went out, she heard the sound of many voices, the tramp of many feet, and, in spite of the bandage, was sure a great light shone upon her when she stopped. "You needn't be. I shall stand close by, and your ma will be there." After the handkerchief was tied about her eyes, Nurse led Effie up some steps and placed her on a high platform where something like leaves touched her head, and the soft snap of lamps seemed to fill the air. Music began as soon as Nurse clapped her hands. The voices outside sounded nearer, and the tramp was evidently coming up the stairs. "Now, my precious, look and see how you and your dear Ma have made a Merry Christmas for them that needed it. Off went the bandage, and for a minute Effie really did think she was asleep again, for she actually stood in a grove of Christmas trees, glowing as in her vision. 12 on a side, in 2 rows down the room, stood the little pines, each on its low table, and behind Effie a taller one rose to the roof, hung with wreaths of popcorn, apples, oranges, horns of candy, and cakes of all sorts, from sugary hearts to gingerbread jumbos. On the smaller trees, she saw many of her own discarded toys and those Nursey bought, as well as heaps that seemed to have rained down straight from that delightful Christmas country where she felt as if she was again. How splendid! Who's it for? What is that noise? Where's Mama? Cried Effie, pale with pleasure and surprise, as she stood looking down the brilliant little street from her high place. Before Nurse could answer, the doors at the lower end flew open, and in marched 24 little blue-gowned orphan girls, singing sweetly until amazement changed the song to cries of joy and wonder as the shining spectacle appeared. While they stood staring with round eyes at the wilderness of pretty things about them, Mama stepped up beside Effie and, holding her hand fast to give her courage, told the story of the dream in a few simple words, ending it in this way. So my little girl wanted to be a Christmas spirit too, and make this a happy day for those who had not as many pleasures and comforts as she has. She likes surprises, and we plan this for you all. She shall play the good fairy and give each of you something from this tree, after which everyone will find her own name on a small tree and can go to enjoy it in her own way. March by, my dears, and let us fill your hands. Nobody told them to do it, but all the hands were clapped heartily before a single child stirred. Then one by one they came to look up wonderingly at the pretty giver of the feast as she leaned down to offer them great yellow oranges, red apples, bunches of grapes, bonbons and cakes, till all were gone, and a double row of smiling faces turned toward her as the children filed back to their places in the orderly way that they had been taught. Then each was led to her own tree by the good ladies who had helped Mama with all their hearts, and the happy hubbub that arose would have satisfied even Santa Claus himself. Shrieks of joy, dances of delight, laughter and tears, for some tender little things could not bear so much pleasure at once, and sobbed with mouths full of candy and hands full of toys. How they ran to show one another the new treasures, how they peeped and tasted, pulled and pinched, until the air was full of strange noises, the floor covered with papers, and the little trees left bare of all but candles. I don't think heaven can be any better than this, sighed one small girl as she looked about her in a blissful maze, holding her full apron with one hand, while she luxuriously carried sugar plums to her mouth with the other. Is that truly an angel up there? Asked another, fascinated by the little white figure with the wreath on its shining hair, who in some mysterious way had been the cause of all this merry-making. I wish I dared to go and kiss her for this splendid party, said a lame child, leaning on her crutch as she stood near the steps, wondering how it seemed to sit in a mother's lap as Effie was doing, while she watched the happy scene before her. Effie heard her, and remembering Tiny Tim, ran down and put her arms about the pale child, kissing the wistful face as she said sweetly, "You may, but Mama deserves the thanks. She did it all. I only dreamed about it. Lame Katie felt as if a true angel was embracing her and could only stammer out her thanks, while the other children ran to see the pretty spirit and touch her soft dress until she stood in a crowd of blue gowns laughing as they held up their gifts for her to see and admire. It was a pretty sight, and the ladies found it hard to break up the happy revel, but it was late for small people, and too much fun is a mistake. So the girls fell into line and marched before Effie and Mama again to say good night with such grateful little faces that the eyes of those who looked grew dim with tears. Mama kissed every one, and many a hungry childish heart felt as if the touch of those tender lips was their best gift. Effie shook so many small hands that her own tingled, and when Katie came, she pressed a small doll into Effie's hand, whispering, "You didn't have a single present, and we had lots. Do keep that. It's the prettiest thing I got." "I will," answered Effie, and held it fast until the last smiling face was gone, the surprise all over, and she safe in her own bed, too tired and happy for anything but sleep. "Mama, it was a beautiful surprise, and I thank you so much. I don't see how you did it, but I like it best of all the Christmases I ever had and mean to make one every year. I had my splendid big present, and here is the dear little one to keep for love of poor Katie, so even that part of my wish came true." And Effie fell asleep with a happy smile on her lips, her one humble gift still in her hand, and a new love for Christmas in her heart that never changed through a long life spent in doing good. I wish you a calm and restful night ahead. May your dreams be filled with joy and wonder throughout this magical holiday season. Sweet dreams, my friend. Sleep well.